Now I want to give a chance just to any of our panelists to add anything that they feel still needs to be said about agendas for research and activism and perhaps policy, or the connections between those.
Yes, well, one thing, I noticed that some model did not answer my question in the first day. We have the feeling that it is very important to do analytical work and to look how things are and try to understand what is going on, and that we have really big gaps. But I think it is also very important for us that academics engage in trying to identify alternatives and things to do. So we have the perception that we are very hesitant on that. If we ask you, where should we attack the financial system? Because we don't know exactly what are the targets, these strategic points. So this kind of knowledge we need. And it would be really good if you can engage in that, and we can go through all the levels. I think there is also, well, the people working on seeds have this dialogue with academics and researchers about the production of knowledge and how people on the ground produce knowledge. And I think sometimes we are more like the NGOs and people working with movements forced to produce knowledge for them, which is known as grey literature. For instance, for me as a human rights defender, I have always to come up with a legal strategy, or the people working on the ground, trying to catch whatever law is useful at national, regional, customary level, or international, whatever, and try to defend. And is that not knowledge production? And we are working in very precarious conditions to do that work. So if you could engage in that, for instance, would be also great. I reiterate the call to sign on to the Dakar appeal. This is a process led by ROPA and Anglia Campesina. We've met in Dakar and with many other organizations put together this appeal. It is a pity that Ibrahim Koulibaly could not come and couldn't be here, because his organization is leading one of the most important resistance experiences to land grabbing in Africa. I think the idea and the discussions we had in Dakar is precisely we need to mobilize a much broader alliance of what we have had in the past. And this is the goal of that document, to try to put a visible thing so that many people can engage from many sides. You find it in the internet, it's very easy, you can sign on, you just give into Google Dakar appeal in English, French or Spanish, and then you will get it. If you could help us spread this appeal and sign on, would be good. And I hope also that LDPI can, in a sense, put a sort of communication tool so that whenever we have this kind of needs of knowledge production in a very short time for a very important political process at whatever level, we can communicate that to you and see what help you can provide. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sofia. I think perhaps, given that this call has come from a few quarters to sign up to the Dakar appeal, perhaps we should just put it as one of the resources on the conference website so people can access it easily. Anything else to add on agendas?
Yeah, just to link up with the points Sofia was making. Clearly, I think academics have a dual role to play in this discussion. And one of them has to do with leading debates and also repositioning the debates to ensure that the focus would be on really the critical processes rather than other processes. But the other one, the more difficult agenda, has to do with being able to intervene in ongoing processes and negotiations and lending their research and their energy to these kinds of things. And sometimes there's a contradiction between these two processes, because people think of research as long-term a long-term undertaking and so on. So this is a very challenging situation, and I think it requires a bit more thinking about how to craft research agendas going forward. In relation to the work we are already doing, one of the areas I think that we need to look at a bit more closely has to do with the micro studies. When we came into this conference, there was the point raised that the micro studies are very useful because they show us precisely what's going on on the ground and on the countryside, in the countryside and so on. But I found that, in a sense, their level of abstraction was a bit too high. And you made the point this morning that the countryside is not homogeneous, that there are different interests within communities and so on. And we do not get that sense enough in the micro studies. It's particularly disappointing that one cannot see, for example, a discussion about gender issues in many of the micro studies, or about the youth and older people. Even class relations in the countryside, I do not think are coming out too clearly in many of the micro studies, or even relations of kinship and so on. And I think we need to take these matters seriously if we are talking about agrarian transformation, if we are talking about social differentiation and so on, because otherwise we may continue to make general noises about impacts on livelihoods and so on. So these are matters I think to take a bit more seriously, and it requires thinking about our methods again and redesigning methods that allow us to look at intra-household relations, but also not only production relations, but also relations of reproduction, because really we are talking about labor, reproducing the agrarian labor force and so on. How is that done? What are all these non-market processes that are at play and so on, which have such a profound impact on people's livelihoods? The second area that I think might be very useful for our agendas going forward has to do with a point somebody has already made about the state and state processes. In Africa, we might be thinking not just about the national state, but also about the local states and local processes. A few days ago, people were talking about the chieftaincy and its implications for agrarian livelihoods. But also to remember that in Africa, there are all these regional processes. The Africa, the AU, NEPAD, and so on actually have agricultural policies and also have land policies. So how do these play out in these processes of land acquisitions and so on?
I think we actually are going to have to wrap up. I'm sorry, Thomas and Ben, is that okay if we leave it at that?
That's it. Half a minute.
Okay. 30 seconds. I'm going to time you and then take away the mic.
Something very quick. I mean, so again on this relationship with activists and researchers, and somebody's called it a love-hate relationship today, right? There are clearly tensions, I think, but I really want all of us to recognize how productive these tensions are. We should really make use of them, both for activism, as in terms of keeping the agenda open, the issues open, but also for research. I mean, this is great entry points for research, right? The key thing to remember to keep those tensions productive is to keep up dialogue. And I mean, in this context, I want to say, what I really appreciate is the event. The event was organized and where the participants were brought together, but also JPS, Journal of Peasant Studies. John, what you're trying to do, I think is really the right way to proceed.
50-second action point. In one panel yesterday, a panelist was talking about an African country and said, we need to act fast because once the land is lost, it's gone forever. This is wrong and it's defeatist. We should not be just talking about stopping land grabbing, putting a moratorium on land grabbing, but we should be talking about ways to grab land back. Exactly. And in our next comments on alternatives, no, when the beneficiaries of land deals, the corporations, the local elites and so on, have not fulfilled their promises of incomes, jobs, etc., the dispossessed have every right to reoccupy, reclaim the land from which they have been dispossessed. Then just one thing, gender has been almost absent from our sessions, and this is a great pity, but I think people are mostly aware of that. But there's one other thing that has been completely absent, and has only been mentioned once, and just now by Dzodzi. We talk about the future of agriculture, but we seem to have the idea that today's farmers are the future farmers. Well, they're not, they'll be dead. Are there any of their children who want to be small farmers here? There's this stylized fact that rural youth in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, and in Europe are no longer interested in agricultural or rural futures. We need to examine this very seriously. Is it true or not? Do they really not want... Somebody mentioned in the very first session the assault on rural culture. Well, one of the worst culprits in this are rural schools. Once you go to the first years of secondary school, you are taught to want not to be a farmer. And if small-scale farming is going to feed the world and keep it cool, it needs the energies and the skills of well-educated young rural people. FAO has a policy on its website of supporting programs to give young people access to land, but I've never seen anybody doing anything about this. If young people are not interested in farming, or if we make them not interested in farming, we have no arguments against large-scale corporate farming because there'll be nobody else to do it.
Thanks very much. We're going to pull this session to a close. I want to make one observation about the many ways in which people talked about continuing with documenting and critique and analysis, but also moving beyond and towards alternatives and agenda setting. And that took various forms from Sergio, from Adnan and Edward around bringing attention to deconcentration, to land reform, bringing agrarian reform back onto the table, documenting alternatives at a grassroots level. But I want to raise one thing, which is I think one of the strengths of this conference and of many inputs here like Phil's and others, is an attempt to join up different levels. And so I think that when thinking about alternatives, it's going to be a real challenge to think about alternatives not at a localized level, but in a joined up way that helps us to think globally as well and around food regimes as well as local struggles. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to close the conference for us.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, the final panel. This conference was never going to finish with a neat line, and it's a conversation that's going to carry on. It's been amazing, actually. I feel totally overwhelmed and totally exhausted, and I think you probably all feel much the same. It's not always like this at IDS. This has been fantastic. I mean, to have 160 odd people here for 3 days, 32 panels, 120 odd papers. This is a massive and important resource, and I think we've really engaged in it. And it'll take a long time for us to digest it, read through all the other papers that we never managed to engage with, and think about the implications. It's not always sunny like this at IDS, but it feels like this should carry on forever. But it's not. We'll go back to our normal way of being, and it's not quite as exciting as this all the time at IDS. But you're very welcome to come back and continue to make it as exciting as it has been over the last few days, with this very unique interaction of activists and academics and academic activists who are really committed to an issue and coming around an issue with that solid conviction to do something and make a difference. And I think that has made this very special. Let me do two things, talk about next steps and some thanks. In terms of next steps, as I said, the website, the conference website now is a massive resource. There are well over 100 papers already uploaded. If you haven't sent in your paper for uploading or the presentation you spot is not there, please send it in, because this is a resource that's not only going to be useful for us in this room, but it's going to be useful for students, others, and so on. So when the team get the website sorted, get some of the video material on it, get some of all the blog material on it, share it widely. Make sure that it's well used, because this is a fantastic resource which will be very important for a very wide array of people over a long period of time. We're also going to do some more formal publications. We've already had a bidding process prior to the conference from a number of journals interested in publishing outputs of this. We're going to be having a discussion as the LDPI team about this, if we can avoid getting too drunk before having this discussion this evening. But we will be thinking about this, about how to get some of this material out into the more formal literature for wider dissemination over time. And I think that will be a lasting resource out of this conference. The other thing about the LDPI, which, as Jun said when we opened, it's a sort of organic, emergent grouping of people, which was set up by somebody called the Famous Five. But it's a loose network, and we invite others to participate in it. I mean, it's an open space for people to be involved, and Jun, as it were, hosts it at ISS and invites others to become affiliates of the LDPI network and post on our LDPI website profiles both of yourself, your work, links to other materials, so that this again becomes a resource, a networking resource that activist groups and others can draw on over time. So please do that. Send in, you've got the LDPI website on your fantastic little bag, so if you don't lose the bag, you won't lose the website address. So if you Google LDPI, there's all sorts of strange things that are also called LDPI, but it's there in the end. Now we've started the LDPI, it's going to carry on. There's no question about that, and there's going to be a next phase. We're going to try and raise some money, so if anyone's got any money, let Jun or others of us know, to launch another round of the Small Grants Fund. Because the first round of the Small Grants Fund, when we offered 30 plus, maybe 40 grants, small grants, very small grants, but actually the material, a lot of the material in this conference is based on work that was facilitated, at least some of the additional field work and some of the writing up, from that small grant process. To maintain the development and the continued development of that evidence base is a really key function of the LDPI, and we will launch a new small grants fund, perhaps thematically around some of these gap issues in the next while, when a generous person provides us some money to be able to do it. And finally, in the next steps, we are going to have another conference. We don't have conferences just for the sake of it. I hope you think that this conference was not just one of those conferences which we just had just for the sake of it. We chose this moment because we felt that it was the right moment to have this debate with this particular group of people. We think there is another debate to be had, and it will be held in Cornell probably in about 18 months' time or thereabouts, and it will attempt, as Sergio says, to go beyond the reactive agenda. We need to think about what's the next, how to reclaim the debate about alternatives, how to reclaim the discussion away from just responding, but to be more strategic. And I think we'll be in a good position at that time to do that, to carve out those alternatives and to think about it constructively. So keep in touch with the LDPI, your networks, yourselves. This is the point when we officially hand over this fine banner to Cornell. And lots of leftover bags for you to use at the next conference. So watch out for that next phase, because this is an important network and it's an inclusive one, so feel involved in that.